Okay, so in section 12.5, we're going to start off by looking at shape. We're going to look for basic characteristics of a distribution shape. Is the shape bell-shaped symmetric, or is it something else? Again, in section 12.5, we are going to focus on bell-shaped symmetric curves, which are going to be tied into with the name of our section, which is our normal curve. Again, before we get into those, let's talk about a few other different types of shapes that we could see. And then we're also going to talk about how many mounds appear when we're looking at these. Right, so our first type of distribution, we could see a uniform symmetric distribution called a rectangular distribution, where all the observed values occur with about the same frequency. So we call it a rectangular distribution because our histogram ends up to be pretty rectangular shaped. All of them are the same frequency, so they all have the same height. So that is also why we call it uniform. It's symmetric because if we were to fold this in half, we end up with similar things here and here. In J-shaped distributions, the frequency is either constantly increasing or constantly decreasing. So it kind of looks like the letter J that is then filled in with a histogram. So in this case, this one is constantly increasing. This histogram is constantly decreasing. So those are example of J-shaped distributions. The next shape that we're going to look at has to do with kind of how many mounds appear. Right, so what we see here is we see two spikes in frequencies. So that is two modes. So that is a bimodal distribution, right, in which two non-adjacent modes occur. The modes do not need to have the same frequency, but they both must have a frequency greater than the other values in our distribution. So remember, modes occur at high frequencies. So these aren't right next to each other. We have two separate modes here. The next type of distribution is a skewed distribution. A skewed distribution has more of a tail on one side than the other. So it's not a J distribution because if it increases, then eventually it decreases. Or it increases a little bit and then it decreases. So it's not only increasing or decreasing, but what we see here is we see a little tail going off to this side. So in this case, this one is skewed to the right. So a graph is skewed right. If the tail to the right of the peak is longer than the tail to the left. This one is skewed left. So the tail to the left of the peak is longer than the tail on the right. So whether we're skewed left or skewed right has to do with what side the tail is on. Also, directly beneath these two pictures of our histograms, we see the relationship between the mean, the median, and the mode for skewed distributions. So if we have a distribution that's skewed to the right, our mode is going to be less than the median and our mean is going to be more. And then over here it is the opposite case if it's skewed to the left. So our relationship between our mean, median, and modes are different for different shape distributions. And one of the reasons that we're going to focus on our normal distributions is because they're all going to be relatively the same, but that's not the case in this one. All right, so finally our last type of distribution in a bell-shaped symmetric distribution. The highest frequency occurs in the middle, and the frequencies tail off to the left and the right evenly. Right? So it is symmetric because if we were to fold this graph kind of in half in the middle here, they would match up. And we call it bell-shaped because if we were to kind of trace around the outside and kind of even out these bars for our histogram, we would end up with something that is relatively bell-shaped.